A letter of Paul to the Ephesians. Paul is writing this letter to the believers in Ephesus. And he's teaching them what it is to be a follower of Christ. He's teaching them to be the church. And this is something new for these people. And so Paul is doing it through this letter. And this letter is filled with beautiful jewels of words that are inspirational and are there to help the church then and today. But have you ever tried to describe something that has never existed before? Have you found something that no one has ever seen? It's a new invention. And now you're trying to explain it to somebody. How do you do that? How do you get their minds wrapped around this new thing that is beyond their total understanding? It would be just like trying to describe a car to someone from the first century. They just would not get it. They just could not figure out what you're talking about. Well, this is exactly what Paul was trying to do in his journeys and in his missions. He's trying to teach people about something brand new, something that has never existed before, and that's the church, the newfound church, this church that Jesus Christ established. No one ever has experienced this in the human history. The church, this church that is made up of rich and poor, Jews and Gentiles, slaves, the free, men and women. They were confronting centuries of prejudice and cultural differences and coming together as one body, the church. These people were completely different in ethnicity, race, class, culture. They were different. They were all different from surrounding parts of the known world, and yet God was bringing them together as one church. They all spoke different languages. Yes, they were coming together to create a brand new, never seen or never been movement called Christianity. And that's what it was, a movement. And it still is today, a movement. And that was Paul's work, is to make this possible, to inform people how to be the church of Christ. And who is Paul? All the people then would have known Paul as this staunch Jewish man who persecuted those that he now is leading. He persecuted the early church, arrested people who talked about Jesus and had them put in prison, and many died there. And now this man was bringing the good news of Jesus Christ to the known world. And when he spoke, people listened because they knew who he is. Yes, people stood up and listened to Paul's message. And what is Paul's message? Did you get it? Did you hear it? You didn't? Oh no. Should we do it again? Oh, I maybe will bring back a couple of verses, okay? Then maybe we'll get it. But his message is a commitment to Jesus Christ. And this commitment to Jesus Christ does not set them apart. And you're all look at me and you say, what did the pastor say? Jesus' message is that those that follow Jesus Christ are not set apart. Paul is saying that Jesus' followers will be known by how well they live in community with one another, how well they live within the world structure and still maintain loyalty to Christ. That is what makes a follower of Christ different, is how the world views us. Now, how do you get this across to a diverse group? How do you envision a whole new way of life to a whole new group of people? We kind of could be said to be like the Ephesians, right? Because we're all from different backgrounds, different nationalities, different classes, the old, the young, the in-betweeners. So this message is really, Paul is writing to us. We, the church that's here in Estevan, in a community. Paul's message was pretty simple, actually. All he did was just point them to Christ. He wrote in Ephesians 5, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and live in love as Christ loved us, and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. Gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and a sacrifice to God. So he's saying that we are to walk in a way of love. Is that even possible? And what does walking in the way of love look like? What does his love look like? Can you describe it? Well, this is what a Scottish pastor said almost 100 years ago. And you with Scottish backgrounds, be proud of this pastor. His name is George Morrison, who preached a sermon on the subject of unconscious ministries. He said that other people watch what you do more than what you say. He said that that our attitudes and actions have a tremendous influence on those around us, even if we don't realize it. By remaining faithful in hard times, by choosing our attitude, by humbling ourselves in a culture that glorifies self-promotion, by choosing to walk in the way of love, we are exercising an unconscious ministry that causes others to experience the presence of God. So it's not so much what we say, but what we do or don't do. our actions show the people of the world who we are as followers of Christ? Do your actions do that? Do your actions glorify God? I'd like to share with you one more story. How a man tried to get this across to some athletes. Gilman Greyhounds are a high school football team in Baltimore, Maryland. Back in the early 20s, they had a coach named Joe Ehrman. Under Ehrman's leadership, the Gilman Greyhounds went years undefeated. Years. They were the top-ranked football team in all of the state of Baltimore. But Joe Ehrman's main purpose wasn't leading a winning football team. Joe Ehrman saw his main purpose as teaching his players the definition of what it is to be a man. According to a profile of Ehrman in Parade magazine, he believed that true masculinity is based on loving relationships and living for a cause greater than yourself. Ehrman taught his players the ethic of servant leadership, putting others' needs before their own. He created a rule that if any of his players saw a student sitting in the cafeteria alone, then that player was required to join the student and eat with him. Seniors on the Gilman football team were required to present an essay at the end of the year with the theme, "How I Want to Be Remembered When I Die." These young men grew up knowing what servant leadership was all about. The importance of serving rather than taking from society. We have too many takers in our world these days, not enough givers. This is the love that Paul was talking about. This is the definition of love, the love of Christ. People who have such love have a radical influence on society. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, how did Jesus live? If we are to have the love of Christ, we need to know, how did Jesus live? There are estimates that Jesus walked over 3,000 miles during his 3-year ministry. He went out to the people. He went to the people where they were. He met their needs where they were, to preach, and he taught and healed them. He spent time with people. And as a church, that's exactly what we are called to do as well. Show the world who we are by our love for one another. It's through our love and dedication to one another, willing to serve each other, sends a big, loud message into a community. What followers of Christ are all about. Jesus said to his disciples, "People will know who you are, that you are my followers, by your love for one another." But what is the definition of love? Can you define love? Well, I think love falls into 3 distinct categories. conditional, emotional, and circumstantial. Sound about right? So conditional love says, I love you if, or I love you when. Conditional love says you're not lovable yet. You've got to earn my love. Once you meet my standards, then you get my love. Emotional love says, I will love you until my feelings change. Until I no longer get the spark when I see you. Until you make me angry or disappoint me. Circumstantial love says, I will love you until that love requires any sacrifice on my part. And then I'm out the door. Now the question is, what is God's love? Well, God's love has been demonstrated to us through Jesus Christ. The love that Paul is talking about. And you know what they call that love? Steadfast love. Steadfast love. And what is steadfast love? Unconditional, everlasting love. Do you remember what Paul wrote in Ephesians? And live in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. A fragrant offering. Jesus' sacrifice on the cross was a fragrant offering to God. Paul, though, is referring to grain and animals or incense that was burned on the altar. That's what a sacrifice was. And these sacrifices were to honor God. And no one consulted the bulls or the doves. Jesus was the sacrifice for us to demonstrate God's love for us. He knew that he would die for the sake of the people who hated him, who rejected him, who abandoned him. He chose to be that fragrant offering to God to show us just how much love God has for us. Sacrificial love of Jesus Christ is what we have received. And people have been changed for over 2,000 years because of that love. And Paul calls us, invites us to walk the walk Christ made to the cross in our behalf. To walk a walk of love and sacrifice. So we can invite people to church. We all can go to Bible studies. We can participate in community ministries. We can do all kinds of things to tell people that we are followers of Jesus. But if we walk in the way of love, a love of forgiveness and understanding, a love of caring, we don't have to say a word. We are under scrutiny by the world. People are watching the Christian community. And what message are we sending out? Do they look to us and they see the same thing as the rest of the world looks like? Or do they see something different? A pearl of great value, perhaps. They will know who you are by your love, by your steadfast love, by your sacrificial love. As followers of Christ, we are surrounded every day by people who are silently asking the question, does anyone actually care about me? When we walk in the way of Christ's love, then our words, our actions, and our attitudes will serve our Lord God beyond any kind of measure. Through the love of Christ, we can offer hope and healing to a world that is broken and struggling and groaning in upheavals and total despair. We can be that pearl of great value to this world just through our love for one another, able to forgive one another, able to embrace each other, even though we may not like what one person has said or done, yet to have the love of Christ within us, we should be compelled to live a life of love and forgiveness. Throughout this construction time, Lyle and I did not get along very well at times. We had words that we kind of spoke harshly about different ideas, but we love one another, and we forgave one another, and we asked for forgiveness. And we have grown in our understanding what it is to have the love of Christ. Paul says, follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us.